Thanks very much, John, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to talk today about transformation, and I'd like to go back to my dim and distant past. You'd tell from the accent, from Newcastle upon Tyne in England. So I used to be CE at the City of Newcastle. Quite a big social housing stock in the city, 39,000 council houses. And when I arrived way back in 1997, they had what can only be described as a pretty inefficient way of repairing the problems, maintenance issues in the council house stock. So imagine Mrs. Smith, who lives in Arcacia Avenue, and she has a broken door. So she would ring up the housing department and say, my door is broken, could somebody come out to fix it? And they would say, we couldn't possibly do that. We'll first have to check it's really broken, so we'll have to send an inspector out to make sure it's broken. So the inspector would go out and say, well, Mrs. Smith, the door is broken. She said, well, I knew that. You're going to have to ring City Works, which was this direct labour organisation within the council. And so she rang City Works, and they said, we don't trust those housing inspectors. They don't know what they're doing. We're going to have to send our own inspector out to check the door's broken. So the City Works inspector goes out, says, well, Mrs. Smith, the door's broken. She said, well, I know that. You're going to have to ring another number in City Works now, and somebody will come out and fix it. So sure enough, an operative comes out and fixes the broken door, and then the whole inspection saga starts again. 5 visits, only one of which was fixing the door. I'm sure we'd all agree that's not a very sensible way to run housing repairs, and I'm sure it doesn't happen over here in New Zealand. Anyway, so what did we do about that? Well, we did something rather radical. We decided that we would trust the likes of Mrs. Smith to really judge whether the door was broken in the first place, and it didn't require an inspector to come out and check that. We decided to build all of the functions around the tenants. So you didn't need 2 departments handling housing repairs, you only needed 1. We'd put new technology in, so you'd ring a contact centre and they'd have the right technology to show what the history of Mrs. Smith's account was, etc., etc. And even more importantly, we had 78 people who were doing inspections of housing repairs across the 2 departments. We didn't need all of them, but it released about 50 of them to actually do more repair work. And that was about $4 million a year being spent no longer on overhead, but actually on repairing more broken doors and other things. You still needed inspectors for complicated things, but quite a big change, a genuine transformation. It wasn't just tweaking it, it was a fundamental change in the way the service was provided. That's what we need to do in Wellington City Council. We face different challenges, but we need to think in that transformational way. And that's what we need to do with Wellington's economy too. And if we get it right, we can do something quite extraordinary. Now, as John said, I have been round the block a few times. I may look 21, but I have been round the block a few times. So I used to work in the city of Westminster, where if it moved, it was privatised. Even in the case of the 3 cemeteries, which the city famously sold off for 15 pennies, yes, 15 pennies, they didn't move, but they were still privatised. At Newcastle City Council, where I was chief executive, where if it moved, it was a front page story in the Evening Chronicle. In PricewaterhouseCoopers, where if it moved, it was a long and complicated PowerPoint presentation, which you will not be getting today. In my last job at Cornwall Council, where before it moved, it was a front page story in the West Briton. So you can see I was really well prepared for the world of Wellington City Council. And then I got to Wellington and I realised very quickly in July last year, if it moved, you ran, got under the table and prayed it wasn't a big one. Now, I think it is, for a moment, just important to realise how tough it's been in Europe and the United States in recent years. As chief executive of Cornwall, I just started before the global financial crisis broke out. And I remember, and this was no great foresight, they said, well, what are the big 3 issues you think the council will face? And I said, the economy, and the economy. And that was surely right. It was a really tough environment to work in. Just to give you a feel for that, at one point, the council lost the equivalent of 400 million New Zealand dollars per annum as revenue. We had to take out 2,000 positions to balance the books. That's how tough it was. And there were other cities in the UK that had it even tougher. Now, I had 4.5 tough but rewarding years in Cornwall. Like Wellington, occasionally Cornwall can be a bit parochial. If you've seen the TV series Doc Martin, that paints a picture of Cornwall. When I was appointed there were shock horror headlines in the local press because they'd appointed somebody from up country rather than a Cornish man or woman. The press were actually vicious and unrelenting. I was described as a fat cat. The most hated man in Cornwall was one headline, and overpaid and over here. But I'm really proud of what we achieved. We set up the new Unitary Council smoothly. That was a merger of 7 councils without any mishaps. We fixed a range of failing services speedily, and we faced the grant cuts head on by doing most of them in year 1. But having gone through a very difficult restructuring, I think it was natural to start to look at what you do next. So I began to dream of working in a world-class city in a far-off place. I dreamt of a city that was in control of its own destiny because it raised its own revenues locally. It wasn't dependent on government handouts. I dreamt of a city with huge potential for high-quality economic growth. And I dreamt of a city with blue skies, natural beauty, and a nice, gentle breeze. So I joined Wellington on the 31st of March last year and was warmly welcomed by the Don Post as a cost-slashing Thatcherite outsourcing green-eyed monster. Really quite like that. But objected to being called a veteran CEO. That was a step too far, and I will have my revenge in this life or the next one. Now, it seemed pretty clear to me that we had a divided council at the time and a flat economy. So the economy is definitely the area we needed to focus on, and it is clearly the council's top priority. We've got to be clear about the role we can play in economic growth. Before we do any clever things like convention centres, we've got to make sure that we get the basics right. We have to earn the right to do the clever things. And it seems to me the council's got 3 roles in making Wellington a successful city. The first thing is just to do the basics well. Keep the place clean, green and safe. The second thing is do the boring but important stuff really well. Good financial processes and discipline, robust risk management, proper ICT systems, giving our staff, if you like, the tools to do the job well. A lot of that is about efficiency. I remember in my early days of local government in the UK, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, she had the Secretary of State for Local Government was a guy called Nicholas Ridley at the time, and he said, inside every fat and bloated local authority, there is a slim one struggling to get out. Wherever you work, there are always opportunities to find efficiencies, grab them and use the money to do things that really do add value to your customers. And the third thing we need to do is do our bit as a city council to make our city the best it can be, socially, environmentally and economically. It's an enabling role. You're not doing all of it yourself, but you are helping create the conditions for the private sector and the voluntary sector and residents themselves to succeed. Now, we do the basics pretty well, but there is room for improvement. And you know, despite the headlines in the local papers, the organisation is a pretty well-run organisation. But our weak spot is undoubtedly the economy, and we need to do more to support growth. A growing economy is not only good for the city, it's good for our communities, it's good for our residents, and it's good for the city council's finances too. An economy encourages expansion, startups and inward investment, and in turn, this enlarges the commercial rating base of the city, which provides the money to fund local services. It's quite a simple equation, really. So every year, the business community in Wellington contributes over $30 million, which go to the provision of community services. So if we nurture the business rate, we can invest more in the city's social, recreational, cultural and environmental amenities. So that whole issue is really important. Economic success relates back to the finances of the council. The good news is our biggest problem is also our biggest opportunity. Wellington's problem really is unfulfilled potential, but we have all the raw ingredients to be a world-class city. We've got a high quality of life, a compact CBD, vibrant public spaces and natural attractions, all within minutes of great cafes and restaurants. What's the biggest challenge? It's not really business, it's not really government. In my humble opinion, it's within the council. Do we have the vision? Do we have the confidence? Do we have the backbone to make some difficult decisions? Can we put aside petty rivalries with neighbouring councils and work together for the common good of the region? Do we have the money to fund economic expansion? And do we have the stamina to see it through? I genuinely think the answer to all of those questions is yes, we do, and yes, we can. Wellington wants to be known as a yes, we can city, and that's why I'm so excited to be your CE. We're making progress. We hit the ground running in October with a no-cuts budget, the first to be adopted in New Zealand, a new $3 million economic growth package, halving development contributions for new developments, contributing to the resource consent process for the runway extension, and developing plans for a convention centre. But we do need to go a lot further. That's just the beginning. So we've got 5 areas for transformation. The first is the tech sector. We're doing really well with the likes of Xero and Datacom, but we can do better. The little town of Waterloo in Canada gives you a glimpse of what is possible. In the last 20 years, Waterloo has become the second highest generator of tech startups in North America, second only to Silicon Valley. In 1997, there were 50 tech companies in the city. Today it's over 1,000, generating $30 billion in Canadian dollars in revenue annually. So how did a little city half the size of Wellington, with a much less favourable location and climate, transform in that way? At the heart of the story is a university. Unusually, Waterloo University attracts world-class researchers by allowing them to have the full intellectual property rights on their inventions. Stanford and Harvard and Oxford don't do that, but Waterloo does, and a lot of those researchers from those institutions have moved there because of that. They also have a world-class graduate internship program where their students do 6 4-month spells with local tech companies before they graduate, so by the time they arrive in the world of work, they're pretty well versed in it. And finally, they have a range of public-private partnerships to promote startups and provide funding for incubator centres. We can replicate what Waterloo have done here in Wellington, and we will, right here, right now in the CBD. The second area is the film industry. We are world leaders in special effects, and the government's announcement in December to improve the tax breaks on that sector and do a funding package for the Avatar film series provides a platform we need to build on. There are lots of well-paid people working in that sector, but over half of the positions are filled by foreigners on short-term contracts. What can we do to grow the industry, but also to fill many more positions with people who train locally and live locally? And we are looking at that whole agenda with our colleagues in the film industry, and we're looking at the concept of a film enterprise zone where the council would really work with MB and Grow Wellington to attract film businesses to the city and potentially offer them significant commercial rates holidays as part of the incentive plan. A third growth area is higher education itself. We've 40,000 students and 6,000 staff in our universities and tertiary institutions. Whichever way you look at it, it's a pretty big part of our economy. How can we help the university grow? How can we help support them boosting their research credentials and translating those research credentials into products, into companies and employment? And you know, the opportunity now with a new VC at Victoria is that we can actually look at this again with all of our institutions and hopefully find a way of them working more collaboratively moving forward. Fourth area is city facilities. I'm not going to say much about the conference centre. You've probably read some of that in recent weeks, but that would certainly put Wellington on the map in that growing and important part of our economy. But we need to do more than just that. We need a large indoor arena. We need to keep developing our arts, culture and sporting portfolio, and we are. We're currently looking at whether we should hold the New Zealand Festival annually rather than just every 2 years, or at least have a complementary festival in the off year. But we need to do more. The whole area of events is not soft, fluffy stuff. It's real dollars and real jobs. And the final area is infrastructure. Many people speak strongly about the need to have direct flights to Asia and North America. Many businesses say this will help them recruit and retain staff. Can we afford it? Well, at $300 million, it won't be easy, but yes is the answer, we can. Should the government help? Absolutely, but we have to show them that it benefits not just Wellington, but New Zealand Inc. as a whole. Will it work commercially? Well, that's the area I'm more nervous about. If we do proceed, I think we will need a sizable financial war chest to support flights before they become commercially sustainable for a considerable period of time, and that needs to be part of the assessment. If we do extend the runway, then it's pretty obvious we need a dual carriageway to the airport. That's not about public or private transport, it's about both. Buses need roads just as much as cars need roads. Now, we can't do everything. If we did all of those schemes, we'd be adding another $700 million to our debt level, which would be a very significant increase. It would still be below the levels of borrowing of Christchurch or Auckland, by the way, but we're not going to go that crazy. We need to be clever, we need to prioritise, and we need to choose the right projects. Now, what can the council do to help transform Wellington? Well, I don't have all the answers, but I'd like to give you a little quote from Jim Collins, the author of From Good to Great. He said, "I don't know where we should take this company, but I do know that if I start with the right people, ask them the right questions, and engage them in vigorous debate, we will find a way to make this company great." Innovation has to be part of our solution and part of the way we do things. I'll give you a couple of examples. Firefighters in California launched a new iPhone app to alert people in the city trained in CPR when a victim close by needs help. It works like this. Somebody makes an emergency call to report a person going into cardiac arrest. Those trained in CPR who have registered for the app and are closest to the victim are notified through their phone's GPS. The app also detects the nearest portable defibrillator. This app has saved 2 lives a year. It's simple, inexpensive and transformative. Another example of what can be achieved in the same way is in the UK with accident and emergency units in hospitals. The problem was violence and aggression directed at nursing staff, a problem that was costing the NHS £140 million a year. Designers were brought in and they concluded that actually the real underlying issue was lack of information for waiting patients who were waiting a long time with their families and friends and getting increasingly frustrated, and that was boiling over occasionally into aggression and violence. So the solution, an information and signage system which has informed customers better, levels of aggression have been massively reduced, and the problem is gone down significantly. Simple, inexpensive, transformative. It's not all about technology, it's usually about simple ideas rather than clever technology. There is, however, one final challenge that I think we need to overcome. I can say this as a Brit coming to New Zealand, that the marketing image of New Zealand is very much about the great outdoors and adventure tourism. This sort of clean, green image we project internationally is appropriate, absolutely works, but it has one missing piece: cities. Cities are the economic engines of most nations. Cities, more than countries, attract talented people, businesses, investors, and visitors. New Zealand's actually the only wealthy country in the world that is predominantly agriculturally based. But if our economy is to continue to be successful in the future, we have to develop our knowledge industries, our research and development, and our innovation. And they are all roles for cities, not rural areas. Strong, successful cities matter, and we should support them. A prosperous Wellington is good for New Zealand Inc. And to be frank, it's time our friends up at the Beehive woke up to this fact. When you think of the US, New York springs to mind. When you think France, you think Paris, Holland, Amsterdam, Denmark, Copenhagen. All great cities, magnets not just for tourists, but for creative industries, entrepreneurs, and investors. What about New Zealand? What is the great city people associate with New Zealand? It's not impossible to promote the great outdoors and great cities. The Aussies do it, marketing their outback alongside all of the pleasures of Sydney and Melbourne. The US does it too. We can do it too. We undervalue our cities, yet New York, Paris and Copenhagen could only dream about some of the things a city like Wellington has to offer. All, the high quality of life, etc., all within minutes of great cafes and restaurants. It's in our best interests, and in the interests of New Zealand Inc., to have world-class cities in New Zealand. The good news is we already have at least one. It's called Wellington. To finish, we've transformed this city before, and we can do it again. We did it with the stadium, with the waterfront, and with Te Papa, and we can absolutely do it again. Wellington needs to show the world that it's a yes we can city, and to do that we need to think big and focus on not just costs but on the returns of projects too. We have to have the courage to act, and as Napoleon once said, don't wait, the time will never be just right. It's not often I quote Napoleon, mainly because he's French, but on this occasion I think he got it right. Leadership is not about sitting in the seat and being there and feeling comfortable. It's about doing something for the short stint you have and making the best of it. And hopefully you transform the place you're in. I think the Council have made an excellent start since October, and we are on a journey to transform Wellington. But actions speak louder than words, which is why I'd like to end with George Washington. He said, "Well done is better than well said." Thank you for listening. Right, okay. That's a really difficult one to start, and I must admit, having advised against it. The council have put about $750,000 in to bring staff who are directly employed by the council up to the living wage level, which was, I can't remember the precise sum. We're not accredited with the Living Wage Coalition, so we will make our normal remuneration decisions about what it is appropriate to pay staff. We are also committed to looking at whether that should be applied to council-controlled organisations and to contractors. I think both areas are very difficult because we would be shadow directors effectively for the CCOs, which are separate employers. And I think once you get into the world of contracting, it's actually very, very difficult territory. So we'll see where we get to on all of that. Having said that, I do understand we have had some serious low pay problems in the council workforce which needed to be addressed anyway. And this was brought home to me about 6 months ago when we had a death in one of our swimming pools in Kilbirnie, and we had 2 members of staff who did a fantastic job in trying to resuscitate the lady who was taken ill in the pool. And they were on really, really low salaries. It didn't make me feel very proud when people who were doing, in this case they didn't succeed, but these people can actually save lives, and it didn't make me feel good at all. So there is a definite problem that needs to be addressed. We have got some challenges if we're to apply that to CCOs and contractors, and we'll see where we get to. Yeah, no, that's a very difficult, you ask very difficult questions here, by the way. I mean, we already invest very significant sums of money in resilience generally, but mainly that's around the whole earthquake agenda. I think sea level rise has got similar challenges for us. We have a consultation exercise now in the Island Bay area, which is about the damaged seawall there. Do we replace that, which will cost a lot of money, or do we have a managed retreat from that part of the city? And that's actually underway now. It's not just about the cost of protection, it's also about the whole process of managed retreat in some cases, which will not necessarily impact on the council directly. We've seen this with the whole consultation process up in Cabody. I mean, it is a very, very difficult set of issues. I don't have a magic wand for that, I'm afraid. Yes, it will require significant sums of money, as earthquake strengthening does, and a whole bunch of other things. You can't do it on the cheap.